My name is Don K. Preston. I'm the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma. All right, I'm sharing with you how Revelation 14 agrees perfectly with 1 Corinthians 15 and Romans chapter 8 in regard to the resurrection. Well, notice, and I mentioned about the harvest. Notice that Paul says in 1 Corinthians chapter 15 that Christ became the first fruit out from among those who had fallen asleep. He is talking about conjuring up the image of the harvest. Now remember, this is all in the context of the tribulation that we've been developing for a good little bit. But this harvest imagery cannot be ignored. You know, Paul in Romans chapter 8 talks about those who had received the first fruits of the Spirit. So in both Romans 8 and 1 Corinthians 15, you have the imagery of the harvest that is set forth. Then in Revelation chapter 14, what do we have? Well, remember, you have the 144,000 who are out of the 12 tribes of Israel. This 144,000 are the first fruit of those redeemed to God from man. Revelation 14:14. But the 144,000, i.e. the first generation of Christians, would experience the Great Tribulation. Once again, that demands, as I point out in my book, Blast from the Past, The Truth About Armageddon, that demands that the Great Tribulation was in the first century. You know, you can't have the first fruit going through the Great Tribulation without realizing and admitting that the Great Tribulation was in the first century. Because the first century is when the first fruits came to reality. James 1:18. But notice now, we have the 144,000. The first fruits of those redeemed to God from among men. We have the great angel flying through the heaven, announcing what? The judgment of Babylon. Babylon is the city where the Lord was slain, Revelation 11 verse 8, and saying that the judgment of Babylon is near. Now, by the way, Joel Richardson, in his book, Mystery Babylon, completely overlooks all of this language of imminence, trying to deflect it away and saying, well, we have to understand that John was carried away in the Spirit to see the events of the last days. Well, you know what? I agree with that. What Richardson is positing is what I call projected imminence. Well, unfortunately, that will not fully satisfy the constraints of Revelation. Because John's statements of imminence do not come only after he was projected into the future to see the destruction of Babylon. Revelation 1 verse 1 to 3 announces these things must shortly come to pass. The time is at hand. And so it will not work for Mr. Richardson to say, oh, well, those things would only be at hand at some time in the future. No, they were at hand when John wrote. And as he sees those things in visionary form, he sees them taking place. That's what's so powerful about this. At hand objectively, projected to see them taking place, vision and in vision. Well, anyway, notice now, you have this pronouncement and announcement, the judgment of Babylon is at hand. And the time of the harvest has arrived. Now, this is something that is so powerful. This imagery of harvest is found in Matthew chapter 3. John the Baptizer came saying, repent, for the kingdom of heaven has drawn near. What else did he say? His, that is Jesus's, winnowing fork is already in his hand. Folks, the imagery of the winnowing fork is not the initiation of the harvest. It's the consummation of the harvest. John believed, John saw, John proclaimed that the end of the harvest would occur soon. When would it occur? It would occur, according to Matthew chapter 13, at the end of the age. And Jesus used a very distinctive Greek term, suntelia to aeonia. It's only found about 7 times in the New Testament. It is the very Greek term the disciples asked about when Jesus predicted the destruction of the temple, and they asked, "Tell us, when shall these things be? What shall be the sign of your coming and the end of the age?" The disciples knew, the disciples realized, the disciples were not confused to link the end of the age with the fall of Jerusalem. Just like Revelation, the harvest and the judgment of Babylon, the city where the Lord was slain, are absolutely inseparably connected. Now watch. Jesus was the first fruit. Folks, if you got the first fruit, then the harvest is at hand. It's not 2,000 seasons later. And this harvest is the resurrection. And thus, when Matthew 3, Matthew 13, Matthew 24, Revelation 14, all put the harvest at the end of the Old Covenant age, the fall of the temple, at the time of the fall of Jerusalem, then you and I have absolutely no right to put that harvest off to the end of the Christian age, which, by the way, has no end. It was the Old Covenant age that needed to be harvested, folks, brought to its end, so that the full bloom of the everlasting, unending, eternal, new covenant age of Messiah would come into full manifestation, full glory. That's the idea of the harvest. That's the resurrection. Inextricably bound up with the judgment of Babylon, the city where the Lord was slain. And guess what? That means that the end of the millennium was at hand when John wrote the book of Revelation. We'll see you on the flip side.